Thank you for putting together such a fantastic project for us to share with our audiences. I want to set the stage just by asking you both, as scholars and researchers, what is it that you find most compelling or interesting about working in the silent film era? Is there a particular thing that drew you to this area of research?
I can start if you want. Thanks everyone for coming and for staying for this conversation. Yeah. The thing I find so exciting about the silent era is that, films had just been invented, so it was not clear yet what the rules were going to be. And every 5 years, they kind of try something else different, and they try something else. And so each time they make a film, they're like, oh, what if films could be like this? Or what if they could be like that? Or what if we tried adding this thing? And so it was also a time of great political, gender, social, sexual change. So everything about how the world would organize seemed kind of up in the air. And film as this, new, exciting medium that a lot of people could get into, that didn't have a lot of hierarchies already set up. It participated in all of those kind of conversations and contestations and arguments about, how should the world change, just at the same time as how should the medium change.
Yeah, and just to build off of that, and I feel exactly the same way. I mean, in the industry, before it was formed, before it was big business, it was so open to women. Mm-hmm. So women participated extensively as filmmakers, producers. Faye Tincher had her own production company shortly before Rowdy Ann was made. And in the very early years, I mean, obviously, I'm obsessed with Leontine and rough and tumble slapstick comedians, but the industry was just so open to women who had power and creative agency over their own performance. And oftentimes there was a great sense of fluidity between the director, the gag writer, and the performer. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the films themselves. I think the bodily language, the exhibitionism, the constant zany gags, they're irresistible. But also I think the silent era has been really inspiring for feminist historians because women helped build the medium and innovate how it would be used, and then were just written out of the history of cinema. Right. So I think this kind of feminist culture and drive to recuperate that forgotten labor and influence has been really exciting for us as film historians and scholars.
And I'll add one more thing that I thought of as Maggie was answering. The thing I also like about the silent period is both those feelings sometimes when you're like, wow, that seems to resonate directly with me. Like, this was 120 years ago, and I feel that. Right. But at the same time, you say, oh, but here, this feels very different. This is like different, a different country almost. This feels like a different land where, things have changed so much between then and now. And so it kind of oscillates between both of those feelings that I think it gets at something about what, that change is possible, but also that there's these connections we have with the past that we are not always aware of. So I love that aspect of watching and studying silent film.
Just speaking about the form and the silent film form, one of the things that came out to me seeing the whole program again tonight was, I think one of the one of the features of the silent era, as you were saying, like the rules were still coming together, classical form hadn't sort of taken over. One of the hallmarks of that was direct address and these kind of extra narrative shots, like at the end of the Great Train Robbery, where the bank robber shoots directly at the camera. Up until this program, I would think if you asked me, for examples of that, every example I would think would be men. Mm-hmm. It's remarkable how often women get they get the direct address, they're given or they claim this extra narrative moment, and it's something. There's always something subversive about breaking down that fourth wall, but it seems particularly subversive when we see these performers do it. Are there any other tropes from that era that you can see have a different inflection when you see these performers and these women, taking them on?
Well, I'll just say quickly about those direct address close-ups at the beginning and the end of the film. The film historian Neil Birch refers to them as the emblematic shot that's sort of separate from the narrative world of the film or the diegesis, but also in a sense summarizes it or sets up our expectations as viewers. And yeah, so the emblematic shot is sort of spawned from a very early, incredibly popular genre known as the facial. And if you think of one of the earliest films from 1894, which is simply called The Sneeze, starring Fred Ott, it's about 10 seconds long, and a man just sneezes into the camera. And that's the film. But, you know, he makes kind of a funny face while he's sneezing. And those were really popular. And then they kind of fell off the map in the late 1890s, early 1900s. But we see the facial or the funny face-making film kind of return at the beginning and end of the sort of like quasi-narrative split reel or short film, like with Bertha Augustus, right? She has a toothache at the beginning and then she's laughing hysterically, contagiously at the end. So by 1906, the emblematic shots were dominated by women. And some film historians have associated that with like fetishism, you know, just sort of like objectifying women as a spectacle separate from the narrative. But it's obviously much more subversive, right? They're really like, they get the last laugh in all of these films. So, anyway.
I'll add also one of my favorite emblematic shots is in a film we're not showing called The Boy Detective from 1908. And in this film, there's an unknown, we don't know her name, female performer who plays a male role. So she's cast as a boy who's a kind of amateur detective. In the film, the boy has to disguise himself as a woman in order to catch these thieves and uses something that looks like a gun. It's actually a lighter, so it's like a toy. And then in the final scene, you see this boy detective who looks, to our eyes, like a butch lesbian, basically, sort of pretend to shoot at the camera and then open it up. Oh, no, it's not a lighter. It has a cigarette. It's a cigarette case. And then show that, like, this is actually a cigarette case. And then, like, laugh. And then also smoke a cigarette. And so it's just, like, full of these kind of winks and in-jokes and gags and, like, levels of, like, can you see this? Like, what are you seeing here? So it's just another example of how these shots can be so rich. Another example of film form kind of meaning something different in these films is you can see examples of this in Rowdy Ann. And in my research, I was thinking, you know, what makes some of these films, and I work on cross-dressing films and lesbian and queer representation. Maggie works more on the comedians and all kinds of comedy. But what makes some of these cross-dressing films so exciting and popular with audiences who could, you know, have a wide range of entertainments that they could partake in. And this combination of the American landscape, of this classic kind of Western landscape with, you know, horses and these long shots of mountains and gullies, with these athletic female performers who are doing these stunts themselves, you know, riding horses, doing all, and there's lots of other films, including with some indigenous women performers who do all kinds of stunts, but like the combination, like on stage or in a, you can see stunts, and at a Wild West show you can see stunts, but you don't get the landscape, you know, and you can see landscape in photography, but you can't see the action-filled stunts. So like these kinds of performances bring all those things that film can give you that no other medium can give you, and I think that really contributed to this wild popularity of cross-dressed women, including in a lot of Western films.
So, I mean, at the beginning in the introduction, we mentioned, you know, Chaplin, Keaton, and Harold Lloyd. We can also talk about Edna Purviance or, you know, Mabel Normand or Marie Dressler, big stars at the time. But one of the things that's so fantastic and amazing about this project is you really went deep to find like the you know all of these amazing performers that we'd never heard of before, haven't been highlighted in this way before. What is if you could talk each about like, what is the process, or what is the work or the labor that goes into finding and uncovering these films and then and you know bringing them to light? So, Laura, if you could start talking about how you approach the research, and then we'll go to Maggie about trying these films.
So although we started working on this DVD set in 2016, the actual research of these films goes back years. So I first found out about the incredible abundance and richness of cross-dressing women in early American cinema when I was an undergrad at Yale in, when was that, 2002? I was working on an undergraduate paper thesis. And first off, I found this amazing amateur website by a trans woman film fan about cross-dressing in film through the ages. And there were hundreds of films before the 1950s and going all the way back to the beginning of cinema. This blew my mind as, you know, a 19-year-old. Like, how could history have these things I had no idea about? And And my advisor was Charlie Musser, a big film historian, and he's like, why don't you spend your spring break at the Library of Congress and watch some of these films? And so I did, being a super film nerd already, and it blew my mind. They were so queer. There was so much same-sex kissing, so much androgyny, so things that I didn't think existed, and were certainly not in my American film history classes or textbooks. So I realized that this period had so much to offer that no one seemed to know, or the people who knew didn't seem to care. So I started back then, and then like how to find more films was I went through film reviews. At that time, they hadn't digitized anything. There was no OCR of texts, but they had made indexes of film reviews in the New York Times and Variety. So I would these big books, I would just read all the film reviews and look for examples of cross-dressing and plots. And then I would look them up in this database. It was on a CD-ROM. And then contact archives like, oh, it says you have this film, or you have these films. And then there was lots of films that were not in the database either. So once I knew about a couple films, then I talked to archivists, and then they would be like, oh, have you seen this? Have you seen that? Or you should talk to so-and-so. And even I met some collectors who would show me stuff in their collection. So, the base was going through the reviews. And of course, once things were digitized, I did a lot of searching. But a lot of it was just archivists sharing their incredible knowledge with me, and helping me see stuff. And also, even though I work on American films, the films were not just in the United States, but American films were, of course, distributed all over the world. So a lot of times the only films that still exist were in archives in Europe and all over the place.
We went to the ends of the earth to find some of these films. And there are a lot of nasty women who would seem to be obvious candidates for this collection. Like you mentioned Mabel Normand and Marie Dressler, who we didn't include because they've already been released in other DVD sets. People already know about them, or people who are familiar to a certain extent with silent film history know about, like Josephine Baker is another example, could totally be in cinema's first nasty women. But we really wanted to spotlight rare films that were hard to access and amazing performers who no one had ever heard of. So like, Laura's contributions to the project, mine spawned from my dissertation, which turned into a first book on slapstick comedians and silent cinema. And I remember, I think I first saw Mary Jane's Mishap, the one that we enjoyed where the maid combusts through the chimney. I saw it on YouTube, and I don't even remember how. I was in grad school, and the algorithm fed it to me. Now, the algorithm turns you into a white supremacist, but somehow it gave me a housemaid exploding out of the chimney. So that was a revelation, because I was in grad school, and I had no idea what I wanted to work on, but I love comedy. I grew up watching Saturday Night Live and, dabbled in comedic performance myself, but that didn't work out for one reason or another. So I feel like all of the little fragments of my interest, all of the pieces of the universe aligned when I stumbled upon this archive. And I did a lot of, over 80% of silent films are potentially lost. So I remember just reading through trade journals and film production catalogs and reading about lost films. This one film called The Kitchen Maid's Dream that's still lost. If there's one lost film that I would like to resuscitate from the archive, it would be this one, where a kitchen maid who's overworked, alienated, exhausted, dreams that she can dismember her hands to do her housework for her, while the rest of her, limbless torso reclines on the sofa. But I found paper print fragments that were registered with the Library of Congress in their paper print collection that was, transferred to 16 millimeter celluloid, and watched them in grad school at the Library of Congress. And I think I recorded the fragments on my iPhone. But things like that, and like Laura was saying, getting a hot tip from an archivist who knows you as that forlorn grad student who's just marathoning all the Vitagraph films from 1909 or something like that, and going to archival film festivals in Bologna and Pordenone. We definitely had some moments of some cinephilic miracles were happening in this kind of very niche archive world, but it should be popular, because look at how.
And I'll also just mention there's 99 films on the DVD set that we're releasing, but if we had all the time and money in the world, there would be many hundreds more. So this is, even those 99 films is the tip of the iceberg. There is many, many more with cross-dressing, hilarious comedy. So, yeah.
Tell your anonymous donor.
I have a couple more questions, and we'll turn it over to the audience. So if you want to think of your questions, we'll have microphones come down to you when we're ready to ask. So how did you two and then Elif come together as a group to put this project together? How did it all come together?
Oh my God, can I tell the story?
Yeah, sure.
So there's this amazing conference called Women in the Silent Screen, right? Which is exactly what you would think from hearing the title, about the contributions of women to the silent film industry at every level of production, performance, writing, directing, cutting. And it was in Bologna, where this major archival film festival that Paul and I just came from earlier in the summer was taking place. And I was a grad student, so I had this insane flight itinerary where I was going to fly to London via Reykjavik and then take an hour bus to switch airports and go to Bologna. But while I was flying from New York, one of the engines on my plane blew, and we had to make an emergency landing in Boston, where I had a 24-hour layover at a Marriott in Worcester, Massachusetts. So anyway, I finally got to the conference, but I had messed up my hotel reservation, and Laura's roommate was sick and stuck in Berlin, and someone matched us up at the conference. So that's how I met Laura.
This is how film history is often made.
It's true. And Maggie was also like, so I think I want to do something about film history. Can you tell me about that? I was like, yes, of course. Yeah.
Let me tell you everything I know.
Exactly. So that's how we first met. And so while we were doing our dissertations, we were in lots of contact. And I guess it was a few years ago then that we started, both of us trying to program films that we had found in our research for public audiences. And we got together to program something that we coined at the time, Nasty Women, for the Pordenone Silent Film Festival. And then that was so fun and great, and the reaction was so great that we were like, oh, we got to do a DVD set. And we were really inspired by the first women filmmakers and the African-American film pioneers sets that Kino did previously. And we were like, we want to do something like that. So we talked to Shelley Stamp, who had curated the first women, and she connected us to Brett Wood at Kino Lorber. And so we got on a Zoom it was before Zoom, a Skype with Brett, and we were like, we have this amazing project, and he's like, wow, that sounds great, but that's gonna cost a lot of money. And we were like, what?
He's like, maybe one disc, maybe half a disc.
Yeah, we were like, we need at least 6 to 8 discs. And he's like, yeah, no. But I don't know how much of the story of the DVD.
When does Elif come into the picture? How did you?
Yes. Yes.
Well, we both knew her she was incredibly generous when we were grad students. We met her at Pordenone, I think. And she's the head silent film archivist at the iFilm Museum in Amsterdam, where we got over 40 of the films from the collection. And she had been really generous just digitizing films. And so I'm typing in the Dutch translations because all of the iFilms have Dutch intertitles, and I don't speak Dutch. So anyway. So we knew her because she helped us a lot with our research. And then once the project was already underway, we invited her to be a third curator, and that was the best decision we've ever made, I think.
Yeah, and so she had, helped us find films, suggested films for our own dissertations, books, but then she also had independently been researching Kunigund, one of the performers you saw, for years, and also tracking down who was she and how many films did she make, and so we thought that was a great fit, and she was really great, both suggesting films and also connecting us to different archives and archivists who she'd worked with over the years. So many of these films, including Rowdy Ann, I'm not sure we could have included without Elif kind of making those connections for us.
I think you've both made very strong and I think eloquent cases for why these films and these performers can be so inspiring now, today. Put a little more anarchy in the activism, to make change. What do we know about how these films were received, or some of these performers were received at the time by critics and audiences?
A lot of them were really popular, but Leontine was censored in the US. She was known as Betty in the US and UK, and all of the 24 films in her series were distributed in Britain, and they're, rave review, or a lot of the industry is always tooting its own horn. This is the best, funniest film you've ever seen. The audience exploded with laughter. But in the U.S., there was this, Pathé did this whole publicity campaign. Betty is coming. Who is Betty? Is she a pug? Is she someone's mother-in-law? Like, there was all this mystery and fanfare surrounding the arrival of Betty. And then, there was a lot of excitement, and I think her films were really popular. But then as the industry is trying to establish itself as a, respectable middle-class pastime, Betty was pretty much panned, and only the first 10 of her films had distribution in the U.S. So unfortunately, American audiences never saw Leontine Keeps House, the last film. That was the last film in the series.
So the cross-dressing films were by and large really popular, and popular with all different kinds of people, different audiences. And one thing that was so interesting that I really spent a lot of my dissertation book trying to figure out is why censors were very worried about the movies generally. They were very worried about teaching people criminality, illicit sexuality, affairs, adultery, all of that stuff. There was lots of concern by like middle-class club women and police and different kinds of local censorship boards. But there was no concern at all about these cross-dressing films, even ones, that ends with these like women getting into a pillow fight and rejecting marriage. Like, that was great. They were seen as wholesome. Bring the family, bring your kids, and I was like, how could that be? How could that be? And so what I found was that later on in the late 20s, when they're bringing over a lot of European stars like Garbo and Dietrich and European writers and directors, they started trying to kind of sell European sophistication, and with that, lesbianism to the public as one of the kind of cool, exotic things you could see at the movies. And then censors did get concerned, and there were lots of regulations put in place. But before that, there was all of these traditions of cross-dressed women disguising themselves as men, to fight as soldiers, to work, to travel, all kinds of androgynous and cross-dressing performances that were just part of the tradition. Even Little Lord Fauntleroy would and Peter Pan, they'd be played by women on stage. So there was all of these other ways to read these like wide variety of female masculinities that didn't involve kind of immorality and sexuality. And so they were actually seen as great alternatives to the slapstick that was also very much a concern. So it's just an example of how different things can be and how differently things can be read. And of course, different people in the audiences may have been reading very different things into these films. But as far as the mainstream kind of middle-class censorship apparatus, there was no concern at all. And they were seen as, family-friendly, popular films.
And a lot of the cross-dressing titles that are in this program, the Gender Adventures program that we're doing next weekend, I think.
That's right. Come back.
Keep coming back. There's lots of stuff to discover. So let's turn it over to the audience. If you have any questions, okay, we'll bring a mic to you right there. Just wait for the mic to come to you.
I wanted to say thank you so much for this program. I mean, this is fascinating. I could see like Carol Lombard or Jean Arthur, that. I know that you mentioned that you didn't include Mabel Normand and Marie Dressler because they were better known. But I was wondering, does the series include people like Gail Henry or Louise Fazenda or Minta Durfee for that matter? Because I know that Gail Henry particularly had a career as a very mannish kind of woman, and a lot of her films were, and she also owned her own production company. So does the series include any of their films or at all? Or
No. I mean, this was why we needed like 8 discs at least. No, we didn't include most of the American women comedians because they had gotten a little bit more recognition, not widespread popular recognition.
There is a Gail Henry DVD already.
Oh, okay. Oh, there is. Yeah.
Oh, there is. Yeah, great.
So some of their films are available, and we also started out on our list with some Mabel Normand, some Gloria Swanson, cross-dressing films, but by the end we kind of kept shaving it down to be only the most inaccessible.
Minta Durfee has a cameo in Fatty and Minnie Hee Haw, which is
right.
but it's not that
Right.
interesting of a role.
Yeah.
Thank you.
What can we make of this phenomenon that the Nasty Women is international. There's like just, I mean, is there a particular country where there seems to be more Nasty Women than others? But I was really struck by the international, nature of the whole program and how sort of amazingly crazy like all of these various different, national cinemas were back then.
I mean, and silent film, especially early film, was such an international medium. So just because it was made in one country doesn't mean that's the only place in which it would be seen or enjoyed. I think the French films are the nastiest. I mean, the slapstick is the most violent, and women's comedy in particular.
Yeah.
But it's
Yeah, I'll say in the whole set we also have films from Sweden, Denmark, Italy. Is that it? And then lots of French and American.
yeah. There are a lot of German and Russian films we would have liked to include. I mean, we're already working with 13 archives, and that was logistically.
And especially there's a lot of two-reeler comedies, that are 15 or 20 minutes, and we really had to limit those so that we could include everything we wanted. So there's a lot, I remember a lot of two-reeler German films that we would have liked to include.
Yeah, it's about the Wanda Treumans.
Yeah.
Question over here. Oh, we're gonna bring the mic down to you. Hang on one second.
Hi, thanks. This has been wonderful. I'm just curious if it's great that it's on a tangible disc, but would it be more budget friendly? Could you release more if it was streaming? I don't know. I don't know how that works.
It will also be streaming on Kino Now's platform, possibly Canopy, and we're looking into other streaming options. But once it's, if it goes to Netflix, who knows how long it will be up before they inexplicably take it down. So there's so many other components than just, producing it as a DVD or Blu-ray versus streaming online, the kind of working with the archives, digitizing, scanning films, commissioning original musical scores. So I don't know how much.
I mean, I'll say all 99 films are on the disc. They're all licensed for that. But a handful of archives weren't willing to give streaming rights. So the number of films that will be screening is a little bit smaller. And also about half of the archives would only give us 10-year licenses. So that would be the maximum amount of time they could stream. But, the disc will last a long time if you keep it in good condition. But yeah, we are definitely interested in all the streaming we can get, though. I mean, that's part of our strategy.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yes, a question.
Keep your Blu-rays under archival conditions. We can rent you some vaults, right?
Yeah, ask UCLA to keep hold of them.
Well, that's an interesting question. What was it like donning producers' hats to put this whole thing together? I'm curious what you might have learned about the nature of film history by putting together a package like this.
So many contracts. Oh my God, we had no idea what we were getting into.
We never would have done this if we had known.
Yeah, no. I think we had no idea of the details of all the legal agreements and the multiple pages. I mean, luckily, Brett Wood at Kino has a tremendous amount of experience at Carleton University. We worked with Asla Iran, who's the contracts officer. Although the university is not used to making lots of contracts for arts types things. They're used to engineering inventions. So they were like, what is this? So there's a lot of learning. So, and lots of spreadsheets too. Many
Laura
spreadsheets.
is the best organized person I've ever met. We have an Excel spreadsheet for everything. I am terrible at Excel.
They're all Google
so lucky
sheets,
to work
actually.
with
They're
Laura.
not even Excel. But, one thing we did learn is there's lots of reasons why you don't have a lot of archival films on DVDs or streaming today, because it is very expensive and time-consuming.
A lot of people fund it through Kickstarter campaigns. We had a $200,000 grant from the Canadian federal government to fund this project. If Laura didn't work in Canada, I don't know what we would have done, because that money doesn't exist in the U.S. Not from the NEH.
Exactly. So funding for this kind of thing is so hard to come by. So that's why, all the work that, archivists are doing to keep these things, even under often very difficult financial conditions, is really important. And also we're especially grateful to archives like the Eye Museum and Library of Congress, who are very generous with their films.
And it's interesting because I think, Laura, you were saying one of the first films, in your early research, you were at MoMA and you were looking at films that nobody had seen since the 70s. And so, but archives have to save everything for that scholar that comes in and pulls it out. So that's sort of the burden and responsibility, I think, of the archives. Do you have any other questions from the audience? Right here? I'm sorry, we go over on this side, then we'll come back. We got a mic over on this side.
I just wanted to say that in addition to the pleasure of watching the films, the music went so well with all of them, and I congratulate you on finding these composers. Meg Morley in particular, I think she did a virtuosic job on the films that she scored.
Yeah.
How did you go about finding your composers?
We had a music supervisor named Dana Reason, who coordinated, relayed our feedback, and she's in the music world, and she knew of a lot of these performers because not all of the musicians and the composers who contributed to the set have experience playing for silent cinema. Some do, but a lot had never really composed music for silent film before, and it's a really specific skill set, knowing how that music really guides the viewer's gaze and engages them in the film. So we couldn't have done it without Dana Reason, and it was Brett who put us in touch with her because Brett Wood had worked with her on other projects at Kino Lorber.
Yeah, and I'll just say, Maggie did mention this in the intro, but the field of silent film composing, like the field of film composing more generally, is by and large dominated by white men. And so we really wanted to do it differently and to have women, non-binary, people of color, Black, Indigenous composers. And so we too, and Leaf and Brett and Dana really kind of reached out to our networks to find composers, both who could do it and also could do it on our pretty limited time scale and somewhat limited budget, especially compared to like a contemporary feature film. We had a lot less money to offer composers. And so we were really, I would say basically everyone who composed for this did it because they were so excited about the project, because it was really meaningful to them. And so I think you can see that in the scores. And we were also interested in having a wide range of styles, from, piano scores that were maybe more closer to what people from the teens and early 1900s would have listened to all kinds of contemporary musical styles, to jazz, electronic, all kinds of things. And so I think one of the most exciting things about the project for us was working with all of this like wide range of diverse composers and seeing what collaboratively they could come up with.
A number of the films have multiple musical tracks. We commissioned 2 scores, one in a more traditional vein and the other more avant-garde experimental. It really makes a huge difference to how you receive the film, what the sound is doing.
We have time for one more question if we want to come back over here. Bring the mic down.
Thanks. Hi, my name is John. I'm a ragtime pianist and composer. So I'm very interested in like the African American diaspora of the Edwardian period, the world Scott Joplin lived in, So what really brought me here tonight is my friend Pri here sent me the website, and I saw Laughing Gas, the still, and I was like, oh my God, I've never seen this film, because I kind of dig up a lot of films from that era with black actors in it, like the one with Burt Williams and stuff like that. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, I got to come see that. But my question is, on the DVD, were you able to uncover more of black acting from the era? That's the question.
Yeah, so in the DVD set, I mean, the actress who plays Mandy Brown in Laughing Gas is named Bertha Augustus, and we know that she was in 2 other films that survive, one called What Happened in the Tunnel, which is widely accessible. You can watch it on YouTube. Another is called The Servant Girl Problem. And Charlene Register, the Black film historian who wrote a book called The Struggle for Visibility, in the edited booklet, the 116-page booklet, which will be included in the set, but it will also be open source online, Charlene Register has written an amazing essay on Black women in silent film comedy, and she's written extensively about the performer Madame Saltuan, whose films we weren't able to include in the set. The ones that survived didn't really make sense for the the themes of the project. But definitely check that out. And Laughing Gas has a video introduction by the Black feminist historian Kila Wazana Tompkins. But yeah, other films, I don't know why. There are only a few films that really center Black actresses, and they're just so poorly preserved. And other films that might have been thematically appropriate, I think we were just too uncomfortable with. We couldn't make the justification for including them even with a content warning. So that's...
Yeah, and a lot of the films that Charlene Register writes about will have like a Black woman performer just in a bit role, in a 90-minute film. So, I mean, definitely worth watching, but like more of a slog to kind of get to those performances.
One thing I do want to mention really quickly, there's one film in the set called Mixed Babies. It's written by D.W. Griffith. I mean, it is like a very racially problematic comedy about like babies getting mixed up, and you can kind of imagine where it goes. A Black female mother in the film is played by a white actress in blackface. And then in the emblematic shot at the end, right, the medium close-up, it's about 20 seconds long, all of a sudden the Black mother is played by an actual Black woman, and we have no idea who she was, but why, how strange. And I don't think that was particularly common to have a Black actress who's excluded from the film only appear in the close-up at the end, which was often used for promotional purposes. So that kind of thing's really interesting.
Yeah, and you probably already know, but for other folks in the audience, Jackie Stewart has written a really great book about both Black performers and Black audiences during this period. And I think, what the project shows, there is more to find. I think we could only find so much and we can only fit so much, but I think there is more research to be done. So it's exciting to hear about the research you're already doing.
Yeah. I'll just say very quickly, Jackie was co-curator of a previous Kino set, Pioneers, African-American filmmakers. So there are some things that were already included in that set that we might have been interested in for Nasty Women, but we didn't want to reduplicate a recent Kino project.
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming. Laura and Maggie, I want to thank you for an amazing program and for coming out tonight. So thank you so much.